Most of what we remember about King Henry VIII involves his weight, his 6 wives, and his break with the Catholic Church. But the version they taught you in school is a sanitized, incomplete fabrication. He spent much of his life trapped by the same paranoia that defined his father, a fear that would eventually be weaponized by a rare genetic disorder. To understand the sheer destruction of his 38-year rule, we have to look at Henry as a deteriorating biological organism. Henry was the second son. He was never meant to wear the crown. His older brother Arthur was groomed for power, until 1502, when 15-year-old Arthur died suddenly of a mysterious respiratory illness called the sweating sickness. Overnight, the 11-year-old spare became the sole heir. His father, King Henry VII, kept the boy in almost total isolation, controlling his every move to ensure the Tudor line didn't end with a second tragedy. When his father died in 1509, the 18-year-old Henry finally took the throne. He immediately embraced everything his father had forbidden: jousting, hunting, and hosting massive feasts. For 20 years, he was a charismatic, deeply religious superstar. He stood 6 feet tall, spoke multiple languages, and composed his own music. This athletic, educated prince is the version history forgets, the man who existed before a series of medical disasters began to destroy him. In 1536, a knight's lance shattered and struck Henry directly in the visor. He was knocked unconscious for 2 hours. This traumatic brain injury damaged his frontal lobe, shifting his personality toward cruelty. He may also have suffered from McLeod syndrome, a genetic disorder explaining his massive weight gain, leg ulcers, and the tragic miscarriages suffered by his wives. In the years following these medical traumas, he began executing his closest advisors and friends on invented charges of treason. The year 1536 marks the end of his rational reign and the beginning of his descent into a paranoid, biological decline. Catherine of Aragon died alone in a cold castle, stripped of her title, yet she never stopped signing her letters as the Queen. Anne Boleyn was executed for failing to produce a male heir and knowing Henry's secrets. The adultery charges against her were almost certainly fabricated. Jane Seymour died from complications of childbirth, just 12 days after providing the son Henry had desperately pursued for nearly 3 decades. Anne of Cleves strategically accepted a quiet annulment within 6 months, allowing her to outlive the king in comfort. Catherine Howard was likely 16 when she married the obese, ailing king. She was beheaded at 17. Catherine Parr survived her marriage specifically by acting as a nurse to the monarch during his final years of infected ulcers and organ failure. These 6 women were the human casualties of one man's deteriorating health and his desperate need to secure the Tudor line. The English Reformation is often presented as a theological awakening. In reality, it was a political hostage situation. Henry broke from Rome for a single reason. The Pope refused to grant an annulment from Catherine of Aragon. He became head of his own church out of a personal, desperate necessity. He spent the rest of his life executing both Catholics who refused to accept his supremacy and Protestants who tried to reform the church beyond his personal theology. He dissolved hundreds of monasteries to seize their wealth, causing permanent cultural damage as ancient communities were destroyed and irreplaceable libraries were burned. The Church of England was the unintended consequence of an autocrat who could not accept being told no. By January 1547, the 55-year-old king was immobile, covered in infected sores, and suffering from multiple organ failure. The young, athletic prince who once embodied the glory of England had become a tragic figure of biological collapse. He left behind a religiously fractured country and 3 children who would each spend their reigns trying to manage the chaos he created. This forces us to weigh his undeniable cruelty against the reality of his failing mind and body. Henry VIII died as a broken man whose biological panic set the stage for a century of religious war.